Hi everybody, this is Amber, and today I'm going to be going over what I have dubbed the 5 rules of commas. Normally, commas are that one thing that everybody just loves to hate, and mainly because nobody knows where they go. Almost everybody has been taught at some point or another that commas go exactly where you decide to breathe or pause, and that just kind of helps the sentence flow a little better. This doesn't work for everybody because there are some people like myself who could just talk for ages and ages and ages without breathing a single breath. So it doesn't work for choir or band kids. So it's more of a feeling rule and not a rule for commas. So we're just going to chuck that one out for now. It's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. What I'm going to be showing you are the 5 rules that I typically use for my commas. So we're just going to jump right into it. The first 3 are kind of connected, and the final 2 are ones that have been taught, but in so many different ways that sometimes it's not easy to see how it all fits together. So we're just going to go over the 5 main comma usage rules. And we're just going to get right to them. I'm going to outline them all for you. Okay, so these are the first 3, the introductory elements, the bubble commas, and the elaboration commas. I call them bubble commas, I call them elaboration commas. I've also given you guys the proper name for them in case you want to Google them, or if my explanations don't make sense, you have the tools necessary to go do some extra research. So we're just going to go through these guys one at a time. So the first one is the introductory element comma. This is a comma that basically says, I'm giving you a bit of extra information at the beginning of the sentence. For example, if I say, my sisters and I went out of town. The sentence only tells you a little bit. It only says, my sisters and I went out of town. It doesn't say where. It doesn't say when. However, if I wanted to say, last Saturday, my sisters and I went out of town, this is the introductory element. It's a word or a phrase that gives more context to the sentence. You suddenly know that, hey, my sisters and I went out of town last Saturday. Typically, I see this happen in academic papers with phrases such as, according to this person, or because of this event, comma, etc., etc. So these sort of things are the things you'll be able to use. The way to tell if you've used this one correctly, the way you can test it, is to see if everything after the comma makes sense. For example, last Saturday, my sisters and I went out of town. That's a full sentence. It has the subjects, which are my sisters and I, and it has the verb and all the extra little tidbit thingies at the end, which is went out of town. It's what we did. So if you're seeing yourself putting a comma at the beginning of the sentence, just check the rest of the sentence to make sure it's actually a full sentence to go forward. If it's not a full sentence, if it doesn't have that subject and that verb combination, you may want to rewrite the sentence. So that's the introductory element comma. The next one is the bubble comma, or what we call the non-essential element. This is typically what happens when you have extra information that you don't want to put at the beginning of the sentence or at the end of the sentence. It's something you want to put smack dab in the middle. For example, my mother refuses to go into the ocean. It doesn't say why, it just says she refuses to. But let's say I wanted to defend my mother and say, hey, now don't judge her too harshly. My mother, who is deathly afraid of sharks, refuses to go into the ocean. All of a sudden, I've given you extra information on my mother in the middle of the sentence. Sometimes when I'm being sarcastic or snarky, I will call this the Emperor's New Groove comma or the Deadpool commas. Simply put, it's you have a full sentence and you're interrupting yourself to just bring in some extra information, like that scene from The Emperor's New Groove where Cusco stops the entire movie to say, hey, this movie's about me, not him. Or when Deadpool kind of stops all the action around him to look at the camera and say, you know what, I want some chimichangas. Same principle. The way to tell if you've used this one correctly is to take this phrase that you've bubbled in commas. So you've got a comma at the beginning of the phrase and at the end of the phrase. If you took that entire thing out, would the sentence still be a sentence? So it would read, my mother refuses to go into the ocean. It's a full sentence. If you find that you have interrupted yourself and then you kind of forgot where you were, so you restarted the sentence, so it sounds like, my mother, she refuses to go into the ocean, and all of a sudden you have two subjects in there, you can just get rid of one of the subjects or rewrite in some way, so that way, if you took the bubble phrase out, the sentence would run as one coherent thought. Typically in academic papers, I see something like, I can't spell Seuss. There you are. I should actually think of a sentence. Okay. Or it usually gives extra information. So let's say we have a book title and we have to say who it's written by for our making sure that there's a credential there. Green Eggs and Ham, written by Dr. Seuss, is a good book. It has the title, it has the author's name, and then all of a sudden you can say whatever you want about the book. Or Dr. Seuss, who writes children's books, died many years ago, explaining who that person is that you're talking about. Say Dr. Smith, a geology professor, says that rocks fall. It just gives the name, it gives the audience why they should be listened to, and then you can continue on with whatever you're going to say. It's really, really helpful. And again, the way to test if you're using this bubble comma correctly is to take the phrase out of the book, take the phrase out of the sentence. So we'll take this one and we'll take it out. Dr. Seuss died many years ago. All of a sudden, that's an independent sentence. It can work on its own. So we just stick it right back in there, and bada bing, you have bubble commas. You've done it. Now this last one is very similar to the introductory element comma and to the bubble comma. The elaboration comma or the vocative end comma is when you have extra information that you want to put at the very end of the sentence. Introductory element was at the very beginning, bubble commas are in the middle, and vocative end or elaboration commas are at the very, very end. So let's say I want to talk about the little girl loves her wagon. But what if I wanted to describe the wagon? If I just want to describe the wagon, I'm saying it is red and has 4 wheels. The little girl loves her wagon, which is red and has 4 wheels. This comma just basically says, hey, I'm going to explain the last thing I talked about. This one is really, it can be very confusing because we never use this comma with, we only typically use this comma with words such as who or which. Words such as because or such as, they don't need this comma. Let's see. Basically, the way to tell if you're using this one correctly is, does this phrase, I have to highlight it actually, does this phrase describe the last subject? And it's really confusing. You can definitely ask for a tutor for help with this particular concept because it's very difficult to get as a general. I think it's probably the hardest comma of the 5 to get to know. I typically see this one a lot when students have made a very big point in their sentence and they used a very big topic that they're like, maybe I should explain this topic a little more. So the Great Comet Shower was filled with meteorites. The Great Comet Shower was filled with meteorites, which are chunks of ice and rock piercing through the atmosphere. I'm explaining what meteorites are at that point. Typically, I want to say be very careful with this comma and this usage because you only want 1, maybe 2 explanations in the sentence. If you have more than that, you will create a run-on sentence and your sentence will be too heavy. If you want to break up a sentence where you find yourself having too many elaboration commas, it's actually very simple. The first part of the sentence is already an independent sentence. It already has that subject, which is over here, and it has that verb and all the other fun things. And I misspelled meteorites. We're just going to fix that with Word. So it's already a full sentence. You can add a period there. The difficulty comes when you're transforming the second thing. However, if you notice, the word which already refers to meteorites. So you can replace which with the word meteorites, are chunks of ice and rock piercing the atmosphere. Or, I'm just going to do this one again. You can say these, which is the pronoun, the plural pronoun for meteorites. Either way, this can break up elaboration commas if you have too many of them, but this is how the elaboration comma works. It just explains that last little bit of the sentence, and you can totally break it up if you find your sentence getting too long. This is the hardest of the commas to deal with, but once you have this one down, then you have it down pat. So once you have that down, we can move on to the next one. Now, I didn't actually say what I was going to be covering for 4 and 5, and that's my bad. But the fourth of the comma rules is the FANBOYS. This is something we typically learn while we're younger, but I don't know about you guys, but I forgot about this as soon as I left English class back in whichever grade I learned it in. I'm not sure which grade I learned it in. I had to relearn it in order to be a tutor. That's the important part. So I'm just going to go over it now, since you guys didn't have to do that. The FANBOYS, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. The most commonly used words for this purpose are and, but, and or. FANBOYS are also called this fancy term called conjunctions, but I'm not a fan of fancy terms, so I just call them the FANBOYS. So let's actually move these up here. So that way you can see them all at once. So here are our FANBOYS: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So what? Why would we use words when we're trying to look at commas? And the main thing is These words plus a comma are used to bring two independent sentences together. They're usually simple sentences, but you could go more complex if you want to. I'm going to go simple because I like simple. This is just what's on my mind at the moment. Please forgive my nerdiness. But I like Harry Potter. I am a Hufflepuff. They're both simple statements, but if I wanted to just be a little creative and stick them together, what I would say is I like Harry Potter, comma, and then I get to pick one of the fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. The two words that would work best for this sentence would be for and. They're both kind of the let's add a point on top of another point. And would be really common, but I'm feeling fancy, so I'm going to use for. I like Harry Potter, for I am a Hufflepuff. It's actually grammatically correct. If you want to try these extra words and just be fancy with it, you totally can. If you want to do something else, I like Harry Potter and I am a Hufflepuff. Whichever one works for you. Typically, I see this when students have a couple of main points that they want to make, but they're so similar and they're like, why can't I just put it into one big sentence? Here's the good news. You absolutely can. Dr. Green revealed his latest invention in 2013. He solved world hunger. Dr. Green revealed his latest invention in 2013. He solved world hunger. I've got two independent sentences right there. But I want to make it one full sentence. Dr. Green revealed his latest invention in 2013, and he solved world hunger. Basically, the way to test if you're using this one correctly is just to say, hey, can I take that comma and that fanboy and just take them out? Can I replace both of those with a period? If you can, then you've used it correctly. Awesome. You just put that right back and you're done. Again, you've got for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And each of these words has a different usage to them. Like I said, for and is when you want to put one word on top or one idea on top of another. Nor it's this idea and that idea won't work. But not this idea, but that idea. And these are just things that you'll probably have to look into, or I'll have to make another video on them because they have a lot of uses, and we just don't have the time to get into them in this video, but perhaps another one. The last comma thing are lists. And a lot of people look at me funny when I go over this one. They're like, come on, lists? I know what a list is. And I'm like, I know you know what a list is, but this is just another comma rule because it's really, really, really common for everybody to use a list. Let's say your mom asks you to go to the store. Can you go buy? You don't want a comma there. You don't want a comma after buy. Milk, honey, and sugar. Can you go buy milk, comma, honey, comma, and sugar? This is called the Oxford comma. It's totally optional. I like having it for consistency's sake. Everyone else calls me crazy. It's whatever you want. It's your choice. But if you have 3 items or more, you're going to want those commas. 2 items don't need a comma whatsoever. It's just this and that. Here is where lists get ever so slightly complicated. Milk, honey, and sugar are all nouns. They all sound the same. But what if I wanted to do something slightly different? The scientist had to ask for permission, set up the lab, and begin the experiment. Each of these list items, and I'm just going to separate them out so that way it's easier for y'all to see. The scientist had to ask for permission, had to set up the lab, had to begin the experiment. Each of these verbs, which I'm going to put in red text, or no, let's highlight them because highlighting is fun. Each of these verbs is the same tense. Yes, tense. Tense is the word I'm looking for. It's the same tense. Ask. They have to ask. They have to set up. They have to begin. Each of these is just, what's that word I'm looking for? I don't know anymore. You can't say the scientist had to ask for permission, setting up the lab, and began the experiment. This is to ask. This is setting up, which is a totally different tense. And began is past tense. It just makes a very confusing sentence for your reader. So when you're double checking your lists and you find that you're using verbs, you want to go ahead and make sure that they're all the same tense. If you're using past tense, keep it in past tense. If you're using present tense, keep it in the same kind of present tense that you were using in the first one. So I'm just going to go ahead and recorrect it. Ask for help, set up the lab, and begin the experiment. Usually the first verb you use is the one you want to use, so try and match with that one. Once you've done that, you're all set up. So the 5 comma rules, just as a reminder, we've got the introductory element, which is a word or phrase at the beginning of the sentence that gives you context for the rest of the sentence. Bubble commas, which gives you extra information in the middle of the sentence. Elaboration commas, which gives you extra information at the very end of the sentence. FANBOYS, which help you combine 2 different sentences into one. And lists, which are listing out items. These can be verbs, these can be nouns. Keep the nouns with the nouns, keep the verbs with the verbs, keep the past tense verbs with the past tense verbs, and the present tense verbs with the present tense verbs. It can feel confusing, but you've been doing it basically your entire life. It's just the rule now that you are fully aware of. And yeah, these are the 5 comma rules that I use to make sure that my papers are good. If you find yourself using a lot of commas, basically try and highlight them in your paper and say, okay, which rule does this follow? So some ways to see if you can figure out these exceptions or these extra things, you can go to csub.edu/WRC. Again, the URL is csub.edu/WRC. And we're just going to check out resources for writers. These will have like handouts that are really, really useful. I direct people to this site all the time. We're going to look for, under grammar, right up top here, when to use commas and other punctuation marks. You're going to click that and it's going to download something onto your computer. As you can see, I've already downloaded one before, and that's because everyone can use a little reminder every now and again. So I'm just going to click it. And it's going to open up on your computer. I'm going to hit Enable Editing. And this is for using a comma. You're just going to want the top half of the paper because the bottom half is just a repetition of the top. It's going to talk about what we talked about. here are these FANBOYS. We've got that independent sentence, the comma, and the and. We've got that introductory element. Here's the example of a word. Here's an example of a phrase. Non-essential elements. My mother, who was afraid of the water, refused to get into the ocean. Or sometimes people just use a word to highlight something important that's coming up. This vacation, therefore, was the best my family has ever taken. That's fun. To separate 3 or more items in a series, people call them series, people call them lists. I call them lists. The official documentation says series. Whatever you choose, it's the same concept either way. Seahorses, starfish, and even a stingray. The other ones are adjectives, separating out adjectives. Separate a quote from the rest of the sentence. You'll usually use this when you're using like quotes that you need to cite. Digits in a number, usually from 1,000 up if you're American. Sorry, this is all American English. I should have specified. Separate parts of a geographical location. Bakersfield, California. That's a town that's in California. Separate parts of an address. Gardenwood Lane, comma, Bakersfield, comma, California, then the zip code. Separate parts of a full date. August 18th, comma, 1989. And set off a title after it appears after name. You're not going to use this very often, but it is a thing. This one doesn't have the elaboration comma on it. The handout that I typically hand out is not on the WRC website, and for that, I don't like the fact that it's not there, but it's not. So if you have any questions about that elaboration comma, again, you're more than welcome to set up a virtual appointment with a tutor, and we'd be more than happy to work with you on it. But you're allowed to download this or watch this video as many times as necessary to help you understand it, or enough to gather questions that you're more than welcome to ask when it comes to your next tutoring session. That's all I have for you guys for now. And yeah, good luck with those commas, guys. Bye.